on this episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists.
It does take, I think, a mentality of being willing to take some risk, because anything new involves a risk, and it may feel like a lot more risk than it really is, but I think that apprehension holds a lot of people back. So there's the lack of confidence in the beginning. Once you pass that threshold, that confidence just grows with your experience, and before you know it, you'll be wondering, well, why didn't I do this sooner? Hygienists don't often, hang out with the doctor and talk about the business of the practice they're working in. What's the ins and outs, and how do we approach this or that problem? So where do you get that knowledge from? How do you know how to start and how to continue? And that's what we are interested in sharing with hygienists that partner with us as well. Here you go. We have a written manual on here's how you get started, here's how you keep going, and we're there for mentorship if needed.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists podcast, episode number 433. I'm your host, Andrew Johnston, and thank you so much for being with us today for today's episode. Great show with Dr. Adam Altdorfer on owning your own practice in Colorado. We had some really good conversations, and they did an amazing write-up in RDH Magazine. I'll put that link to that article in the show notes, so make sure you're checking out the show notes. And it's basically about everything you need to know about owning your own practice. Dr. Adam is on the side of the hygienist, which I really love, because it's not like a them versus us. He's on the side of the hygienist because he sees that it's actually being on the side of the dentist. And I love that outlook. It's kind of big picture. It's an amazing viewpoint. I think his model of dentistry could be just what this country needs. And so I'm really excited to bring you this conversation. If you're interested in exploring more, if you're like, look, this may or may not be for me, but let's just check it out. They will be at RDH Under One Roof in Denver this year. And also he's available by email. He was super responsive anytime I messaged him. So make sure that you do go ahead and contact them. And his email is in the show notes as well. Next week is another round with Heather McGuire as we dive a little bit deeper into the latter part of the conversation that we had from last week's episode. Truthfully, though, we haven't actually recorded that episode yet. That's on the docket for this afternoon to do. But kind of the game plan for that conversation is to talk a little bit more about the mindset and the limiters that we put on ourselves that prevent us from going good to great in our clinics. As clinicians, why are we sometimes just mediocre? What are we thinking? What are we saying? What are we doing that is putting those limitations on us? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. My expectation, though, honestly, is like, while that's going to apply to you clinically and maybe just in your practice or whatever, it's going to be something you're probably going to use for your personal life. I can imagine using this for if you're doing like self-help, if you're working on yourself, maybe your relationships with a partner or family members, maybe your group of friends that you're around. I think it's really going to probably change your outlook on life in general. I've seen this happen for many people when they kind of open themselves and remove the doubt, remove the limiters. They become completely different people, better versions of themselves. And I love that. So make sure you're coming back for next week's episode because I'm sure it's going to be amazing. So one little shakeup that we're having here at Tale 2 Hygienist, just kind of trying to be as transparent as possible. So after this week, after the episode for today, we'll have a series of episodes in which we're going to have a podcast co-host, a hygienist as well, which is really exciting for me. It's been way too long. I really appreciate all of your support, but I know that you're all just, waiting for that second hygienist to come into a tale of two hygienists, right? And so I think that we might be getting some movement on that direction. It's just nice to have someone that has, a different perspective. While I enjoy doing interviews, I think that my line of questioning is probably a little bit fix the problem kind of thing and not necessarily conversational. And it's funny because my brother and I actually had this conversation. You couldn't be two different people between my brother and myself. And, he is someone who likes to be listened to. Like if he comes to me with a problem, he doesn't necessarily want me to be like analyzing for a solution. And then when I come to him with a problem, I'm like, give me freaking solutions. That's all I really want. And so like, I don't feel bad for me. Don't give me the sympathy. Just give me, the answers. And I think that's in my line of questioning. I feel like that let's solve the problems. And I think that you need a different perspective than just that. And so I'm really excited to bring someone else that also has maybe a little bit different energy. One thing that I will ask of you all though, is I really need to hear back from you on if it's good positive feedback. I'd love it to be in the podcast review section of your podcast app. But if it's more constructive criticism for the new co-host, maybe just shoot me an email, Andrew at a Tale of Two Hygienist, and tell me your thoughts on kind of how that's going. My expectation is that if everything's going really well, if you all are really excited about it and we hear back, then chances are we can find a way to make this a little bit more permanent, whether it's with this co-host or maybe someone else. But so your voice absolutely counts, absolutely matters. So please let me know that. So I think that is all for this week. Thanks for joining us. And I know you're going to enjoy this episode with Dr. Adam Altdorfer.
A tale of two hygienists.
Listeners, welcome into the interview portion of the podcast. So excited to be joined today by Dr. Adam. Hey, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
We have a lot to talk about. I've been looking for high and low for years and years and years to talk about independent dental hygiene practice. You look at the social medias and everyone thinks it's such a great idea from the hygiene perspective, but then you get the opposite perspective where it's like, maybe it's not such a good idea. So I'm hoping that in today's discussion, we can talk about some of the myths, some of the obstacles, some of the things that hygienists maybe aren't aware about, like how hard it really can be, but then also how easy it really can be. I'm hoping we can just run the whole entire gamut in however long our episode is today. So hopefully listeners, you're buckling up. This is going to be hopefully quite the ride. Doctor, I would love to start off. First of all, shout out to Jackie Sanders for connecting us. Jackie thinks the world of you. And whenever she thinks the world of somebody, then they end up showing up on the podcast. So that's good news.
Well, it's been wonderful getting to know her, and she has been an amazing support to us, just getting the word out.
Oh, I love it. I want to get into just the background of you. So you're a dentist practicing in Colorado. Is that correct?
That's correct. My brother and I both.
You guys share a practice. How long have you guys been practicing? You guys went to school in Colorado and all of that as well?
So we actually both graduated from the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, but living in Colorado Ohio, but living in Colorado was really the dream for both of us. We love the outdoors, and I actually started out down in Colorado Springs as an associate doctor in 2018.
Very cool. Did you guys go to school at the same time or separate years?
We did. I started 2 years ahead of him, but we got to share 2 years side by side, and soon after graduating, I came out here, and he joined me just a couple of years later.
You know what? That was our dream. So I was telling you before we started, my brother's a hygienist as well. And we actually were in the same he's 3.5 years older than me, but we were in the same hygiene class and everything. And he was like, you know what the dream is to have a business with my brother. And we almost did it. We're this close to doing it, but it just didn't quite pan out. I bet that must be comforting in some ways and tumultuous in other ways, having a brother as a business partner.
Let's just say it's a very honest relationship, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
I love it. All right. So the interesting thing that I find about this is when a dentist is interested in an independent dental hygiene practice. How did this idea kind of come to the forefront of your thought?
So, as I mentioned, I started out in Colorado Springs as an associate. And then my brother said, hey, let's start our own dental practice. So I agreed to it, and we opened our doors right before the pandemic hit. Very poor timing, but hey, I don't think anyone could have foreseen that. And so we got shut down. It was definitely a very challenging time for us as a fresh practice with a handful of patients to make it through that time. And then it didn't get any easier after things reopened because we have just lost so many hygienists to other fields. And I think there's generally a good explanation for why that happened. I think a lot of people got time to think about, am I happy here? And happy really being, the key sentiment, because after the pandemic, actually, hygienists in Colorado saw a great increase in their wages. I mean, there's record high wages now for their services. I think that's wonderful. But the fact that we still had so few people come back, I think tells me that happiness is what really isn't being accomplished working in a lot of dental offices currently. And I know that that's been something that I've heard from many hygienists saying that, it's not about the money. I would like to do things my way. And we try to accommodate that. And I think we've been a very flexible employer to our hygienists in the past. However, still, it was just such a tumultuous time period that we found it hard to keep a hygienist with us with just having very low patient volumes, only being able to employ for a few days a week, not a full schedule. And we kept thinking that this shouldn't be so hard. What can we do? What can we offer more that would make someone want to work with us long term? Especially since, not only from my perspective, I like working with the same people for longer periods of time. I don't like turnover. It's just, I think, you get a relationship with anyone you work with. It's your work family. But the same for our patients. They love seeing the same hygienist year after year. It's a very personal relationship, I think, having someone in your mouth for that long, digging deep and, going after things you didn't know were there. So ultimately we said, okay, well, what we see work well in most dental business models is, if you'd like to stabilize providers at your location, is to consider offering a partnership opportunity. And so this is where I started. We said, okay, how can we stabilize things now that things are just unstable in general in our industry, but also most other industries? So this was the initial reason for this approach, and it's been wonderful. I mean, we really do see that, not only have we accomplished stability, but I think we've accomplished a lot more. And our hygienist who partners with us currently, LaShonda Jenkins, I know she's very, very happy working in her own practice at her own pace, in her own style. And she still collaborates with us just as before, but independently.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, we'll talk about her in a little bit because you have it's a really good, interesting partnership that y'all have. But it also, I think you spoke to it. It's the personality type. It's what she's a driven person. So we'll circle back to her a little bit later on in the show. Do you feel like, Doctor, like I'm assuming that you talked to maybe some of your college classmates and things like that. Was Colorado ripe for this opportunity where maybe other states are not quite yet, since independent practice isn't popular amongst the other states?
I think so. I think there's a couple reasons for this. The first one being, I think the pandemic was a great catalyst for this change. It just created an environment here where we have a shortage of hygienists, and they know they are in a essentially a seller's market, if you will. So they can pick and choose who they would prefer to work with, because it's not hard to find an office looking for a hygienist anymore. Secondly, I think that this is going back in just history and kind of the sentiment we spoke to earlier, that I think a lot of times hygienists feel underappreciated in an unemployed position in a lot of offices, especially I would say, I can't say only, but DSO models typically, I would say, run hygienists very hard. So with kind of that, I think, resentment from pre-pandemic experience of working as an employed hygienist in a lot of settings, to now having a lot of opportunity and options and being able to ask for more, I think a lot of them have begun to think, well, where's the limit? Why can't I, do even more than this? And why is there a limit on this? And this is what we'll, I think, discuss further. But, the final piece of the puzzle, I think, really comes down to just the fact that we see a lot of success stories after the pandemic of people starting their own businesses, working from home, doing their own thing. I think there's been a great shift in the mindset of people of how to approach, making a living and enjoying what you're doing while you're accomplishing that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that really is the dream right there, is being able to have, they call it work-life balance, which I know you're not supposed to call it that anymore, but, having that ability to be happy, also make a livable wage. I would love to go into maybe defining a little bit about the independent dental hygiene practice. Like, can you paint the picture for the listeners what that looks like compared to maybe a normal dental practice?
Right. So essentially, this can be in the same location or a separate location from a dentist, but ultimately it comes down to the fact that it's indirect supervision, meaning that at the time that the hygienist is providing services to a patient in the office, the dentist is not physically present in that office. So this could be, the same office on a different day or a different location altogether. And indirect supervision typically means that we have to have oversight of the patient's information. So we have to have access to their charts, their medical history, treatment plans, and have a direct line of communication with the hygienist to collaborate on certain decisions where the current legislation requires a doctor to be involved in, such as administering anesthetics for an SRP.
Do you find that the confidence level of an independent practitioner is increased or decreased when they're working kind of in their own space?
I think there's, like anything, a learning curve. I think at first there might seem to be a little decrease in the confidence because it's the first time you're doing something. Your first time, you don't have someone there necessarily. I'm not saying hold your hand, but give you support in the moment on a lot of things where in the past maybe you relied on that, and now you're able to make a lot more of those decisions yourself. It's just new, it's novel, it's not what you're used to. But what I've seen in our practice that we partnered with LaShonda on is that her confidence just grew day by day, and I think she came in very positive. And it does take, I think, a mentality of being willing to take some risk, because anything new involves a risk, and it may feel like a lot more risk than it really is, but I think that apprehension holds a lot of people back. So there's the lack of confidence in the beginning. Once you pass that threshold, that confidence just grows with your experience, and before you know it, you'll be wondering, well, why didn't I do this sooner?
Is there a large capital contribution that needs to be made kind of at the beginning to start up a practice? Or is it kind of like all of them? It depends on how large you're scaled to.
It definitely depends on scale, it depends on location, depends on your support. And that's what our company, Experience Dental Hygiene, has, essentially evolved it to solve is how can we not only give support from a logistics standpoint for new business owners, but also how can we give actual manpower support at an affordable rate? Because right now, if you try and open an office yourself, the biggest challenge is going to be, well, either you'll do everything yourself and be faced with the traditional, worries of burnout, or, you'll not make anything because you're essentially paying everything out to staff in the beginning. It's just a huge overhead. Staff is the highest single cost for most businesses, more than rent, more than all your other utilities and subscriptions combined.
Yeah, you don't really realize it as a staff member until you start paying those bills. And then you're like, oh, that is a lot different than I thought it was going to be.
All right. So for that right off the bat is one of those issues that a lot of hygienists are met with is they just feel like they have to do everything. And then when do you spend time with family? When do you actually enjoy the benefits of all your hard work?
Yeah. Do you know by chance off the top of your head, like what is the difference as far as like if I was a licensed hygienist in Colorado and wanted to have an independent practice, are there more requirements? Is there a different license? What do I need to do to be able to have one?
There's no licensing requirement other than to have a Colorado registered hygiene license. So same license that all Colorado hygienists operate with currently. The only requirement in addition to that is to have a official collaborative relationship with a dentist that will be willing to essentially take responsibility for overseeing some of these procedures from the indirect supervision standpoint.
Was there also, I thought I saw something in your article about insurance as well? They have to carry a hefty insurance, I thought.
Well, the cost really where we saw it coming from, but that's a cost we absorbed, was really creating the documents to create this relationship. I mean, it's not just a handshake. It's very specific and vague at the same time, and that's what made it a little bit challenging. That there just wasn't a lot of precedent. There wasn't a lot of examples on how this actually needs to be done. I think we had good guidance, not only from our attorneys, but also from, in general, the foundations that were laid out in current Colorado legislation. But there was still a lot that we had to figure out and see, okay, how does this actually work? What actually needs to be included in a collaborative agreement, in an operating agreement, and what are our defined roles, and how do we ensure that everyone's doing the right thing? So insurance-wise, every business has to carry liability, property, a couple different types of insurance. You can take, for example, you might even consider life insurance that a lot of owners do in case something happens to them. Their family members can't inherit a business that they don't have a license to own, but they can be essentially bought out and at least get the value in a cash form through a life insurance policy. So there's an option for some of these insurances, and some are required, but I wouldn't say they are a majority of the cost by any means.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit again ahead of time, but like I said, I was searching for a long time trying to find, a good person to speak with on this. And it seems like in that time, that probably about 10 years or so that I've been looking, the independent practice market, I would say, has not significantly increased. I feel like it's the same number of people who have always been practicing independently. And there's not, again, while there's this groundswell of hygienists who are like, this is such a great idea, not really many people are opting into it. Is that tide changing now from your experience, or is it still kind of just a trickle of hygienists that are interested in doing this?
Within the limits of my knowledge on the exact statistics, I would say it to me feels that it's not changed all that much. There might be a slight increase, but very slight, if at all. And I think the reason is really very similar to what we see in the world of dentists. So I graduated from dental school. I remember they gave us maybe 2 CE courses on some business management, which was really more of a sales pitch by one of these management companies. Tell you that you won't be able to do this without us. And then I went to an associateship, and there I worked alongside a doctor who owned his own practice, has done so for 30 plus years. And that's where I really started to learn a little bit about the ins and outs of what it is like to be a business owner in dentistry, which is, just for a category, it's a medical business. It's the most complex business that you can possibly consider operating. So there's just so many layers, so many requirements, and a lot of risk if you don't follow those requirements, that it can be a nightmare to get into. But I think hygienists lack this knowledge sharing relationship that owner dentists, associate dentists kind of foster over time working together. Hygienists don't often hang out with the doctor and talk about the business of the practice they're working in, what's the ins and outs, and how do we approach this or that problem. So where do you get that knowledge from? How do you know how to start and how to continue? And that's what we are interested in sharing with hygienists that partner with us as well. Here you go. We have a written manual on here's how you get started, here's how you keep going, and we're there for mentorship if needed. Otherwise, I just don't know where you would get that level of knowledge. Most likely not from the dentist you're working with.
I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, in my experience, hygienists, by and large, every time I talk about business on the podcast, I feel like they, their ears kind of close just halfway, and they're like, "Oh, okay, Andrew, stop with the business talk." But I think there's another faction of us though that are just so interested in it, but we also love the ability to kind of just step away from the practice and be like, "Oh, we're done. Our day's over. Enjoy this business that you have, doctor." And we're just living life, So
yep, and I get that. As an associate doctor, there were perks to that, but I would never go back. The freedom, the independence, it's so worth it.
I want to talk about some successes in a minute again, kind of coming back to some of the other things, but I feel like the obstacles that people would run into if they were to do this, especially on their own, but there's a lot of obstacles to having your own business. Do you and I know you guys list them in the article, and everyone, I'm going to reference, sorry, we'll edit this part. Did you guys already put it in eVillage? Did it already air?
It's there. Yep. I can send you the link.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So listeners, we're going to put a link in the show notes, so make sure you guys check that out, to this article that I keep referring back to that I've read. But you have a whole list of things there where you talk about some of the things that people aren't really thinking about. Do you mind going over a couple of those kind of big obstacles that people don't really think about?
Sure. I mean, the very first one we kind of went into already, and that's just the legal requirements. And these legal requirements are expensive to do well because you need an attorney's help typically. And it's not like something you can just download online and there you go. You can open an independent practice. Here's the collaborative agreement you need to follow. It's something you need to pay someone to develop for you. So that added up. And everyone does that on their own. There's, a lot of money invested in that. They don't typically give it away for free. So I haven't seen any of these, floating around the internet. Second thing is that collaborative supervision. Right now, I think this is something that's changing. Thankfully, I think a lot of the younger dentists are more open-minded about this because they see that there are many great benefits to themselves when collaborating with an independent hygienist. It's just they don't have the opportunity to do so. So, any associate, currently working in a practice where they've, not been able to keep a hygienist knows that, well, they're the ones that are going to be doing the scalings. They're the ones that are going to be doing all the cleaning. That's not what they, went to school for. It's not what they hope to be doing with their time. They'd much rather do restorative or something else surgical.
Right.
And I think those individuals just having such a different experience than people that have been practicing for 30 years and just are used to, having hygienists available and they're kind of on their way out, maybe retiring. They're not really faced with having to make the same decisions right now. But I think these younger doctors are going to be more open-minded about, well, can I just outsource my hygiene? However, that hasn't happened yet. So that collaboration is hard to come by. To find a dentist that's want to put their license on the line for working with a hygienist that maybe doesn't quite understand the benefits of that yet. So that's something we can offer independently of your relationship with, other doctors for referrals, but we'll collaborate to give you that supervision. The third problem is, well, the knowledge for how to run a business, medical business specifically. And then the fourth one was essentially the marketing. It's kind of a new concept in some ways. It's not something people search for online quite the same way that you would imagine. So there's ways you can market the existence of an independent hygiene practice. And typically dental offices rely on insurance in great part for their marketing. They'll go into network with an insurance company and they'll be listed on a provider network portal. Unfortunately, a lot of insurance companies do not recognize independent hygienists as providers, even though that is, something that they can legally practice in this state. The insurances have their own contractual agreements that they can then essentially say, we will honor the fees for your service or not as an in-network provider. Now, that doesn't mean you can't bill out of the network. It's just a lot more difficult, very complicated. It's a pain, and you won't be listed on their portals. So how do people find you? So those are things we have to solve. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, especially in the beginning of a business, is if you don't have traction quickly, your expenses very quickly add up over time, and you can really be in the hole quickly if you don't get the patient base you need to support your ongoing expenses.
Absolutely. All right. So let's say that I'm a hygienist licensed in Colorado. Assuming you guys are only in Colorado for right now, correct?
We're currently in Colorado, but we are looking into being available in other states here in the future.
Awesome. So let's say I'm a hygienist. I'm ready to take the next step. I'm coming to you guys, experienced dental hygiene. What would the first step, what's our first discussion look like?
Right. So initially what we do is we typically direct hygienists to our website because that has a lot of the information there already. What we're doing, how we can help, what challenges have been in the past, what are some current challenges. There are some things changing currently in legislation, which we haven't really posted yet, but I'm happy to talk about that. Unfortunately, in Colorado, it seems that we'll be allowing assistants to scale subgingivally with some additional training. So that's going to really change things, I think. But ultimately, you go to our website, and after reviewing our information, if it's something that interests you, we have a button there that you could click and request a meeting with us, where I will be typically the one talking to a group of hygienists and answering questions that maybe wasn't obvious from what we have posted online already. And we can get into the specifics. And the only requirement is, in order to protect the interests of our current hygiene partners and future hygiene partners, is that we do have some non-disclosure agreements we have to sign before we can get into the nitty-gritty of some of that. And unfortunately, that's some of the information that I won't necessarily be able to get into too much on this podcast either.
That's understandable. Absolutely. I think that's fair enough. Remind me, is Colorado one of the states that's relatively easy to get reciprocity license for dental hygienists?
So as far as what I've seen, so our first hygienist actually is from Georgia, and she came over here to Colorado, particularly to engage with us in opening her own business. And from what I've heard from her, and this is really my limited knowledge on the topic, was that it wasn't too challenging. She said it happened pretty quickly, easier than she expected. But yes, I get what you're saying. It's not always the same process state to state. I think because Colorado has been faced with a shortage of hygienists for a long time now. I mean, this is before the pandemic. I think they've made the process easier than other states in some ways in order to keep those doors open and invite hygienists to come to this state.
So it's more, I mean, I was just going to actually ask if it was a concern that maybe like all the hygienists listening to this, like, you know what, I really want to move to Colorado, and now there's going to be like a saturation of hygienists over there. But it sounds like there's enough need currently that you could probably use an influx of hygienists.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, that's something we hope to accomplish through making independent hygiene more possible, because I think there's a lot of hygienists in states where that's not allowed that would love to do this. And Colorado is a wonderful place to live. I love it here.
I would love for you to kind of speak a little bit towards more. So this business model isn't really for everyone. I think we mentioned it before. LaShonda was like a driven person. I kind of had a little bit of like I think she said she had street smarts and had to go back to school and got some book smarts. She's just one of those people that you just know that's going to be successful in this. Are there particular types of partners that you'd be looking for, or certain characteristics in partners that you'd be looking for?
I mean, LaShonda is absolutely a tale of resistance and resilience, and just, really facing the odds head on. I think it does require some gusto. You have to be willing to take some risk. And it's not a lot of risk, to be honest, but it feels uncomfortable to do anything so different from what you might be used to. So I think being open-minded, being flexible, being patient, these are probably actually the key components of succeeding, because as a business owner, you really have to learn to think differently over time from what you might be accustomed to already. And of course, I mean, being resourceful, you have to be able to build relationships, not just with your patients, but also in the community around you with other dentists and other hygienists that, may be very important to your referrals in the future.
Doctor, I really appreciate your time. We're running short on it. Let's give a plug one more time for the website. If someone has questions or concerns, how they might reach you.
Sure. So our website is EDHP, and that's short for Experience Dental Hygiene Practice. The number 1, boulder.com/experience-independence/.
Listeners, I know it's a little bit long. I'll put it in the show notes. You guys click right on through to it. Any last messages or anything else that we didn't cover, Doctor?
I think the only message I have is that there's a lot of change coming to Colorado and other states most likely following. We already see this taking place in some other states, Kansas and Illinois, where assistants are being kind of pushed towards being allowed to do more hygiene than ever in the past. And I think that's a direct threat to, a lot of hygienists' profession. I hope that we can kind of counter that through establishing more independent practices in Colorado, at least, because I think it really would bridge the access to care issue. It would allow us to have a more efficient utilization of hygienists wherever they are available through this model. And I think solve a lot of problems, not only for patients, but also for dentists. And obviously, there's just so many benefits to being a business owner. So for hygienists, there's only wins.
I love it. I love how pro-hygiene you are, Doctor. I appreciate you so much for being on. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful speaking with you today.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.